Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be trying to figure out what a new Trump presidency might mean for your wallet. Just the economic impact.
Impact on you.
Yeah, exactly. We've got some really interesting Korean language news analysis to dig into. They're taking a look at what his economic policies might look like based on, his past.
Based on his track record.
Yeah, exactly. His track record, his actions and statements from the past. And it's tough to predict the future, right? But we can at least try to understand what might happen. What kind of ripple effects we might see, especially when it comes to things like tariffs.
Yeah, tariffs, energy, global trade.
Exactly.
Big stuff.
The big stuff. So what's really interesting is that these Korean analysts aren't just thinking about things from an American point of view.
Right. They're looking at it globally,
Yeah.
especially for South Korea. As a major U.S. ally, what does it mean for them?
Right. And that global perspective is key because even if you personally are not, importing and exporting goods directly, those shifts in the global economy can still hit your wallet.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's start with Trump's governing style. This analysis that we're looking at, it really highlights his tendency to use executive orders to push through policy.
Push it through quickly. Yeah.
That's right. An executive order can be a really powerful tool. It lets a president kind of bypass that usual legislative process and just make things happen fast.
Right.
But that speed, it can also come with drawbacks. Potential legal challenges, concerns about cutting corners.
So for our listeners out there, this means things could change really quickly.
Quickly, keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah, gotta stay informed.
Stay informed, pay attention.
Yeah, and speaking of things that could change quickly, let's talk about tariffs. The analysis that we're looking at, they actually call tariffs the most beautiful word in Trump's vocabulary.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
You remember that?
Yeah, he loves that word. He does. He seems to see tariffs as like a central part of his economic strategy.
Right, and he's hinted at a plan for universal tariffs on all imports, maybe 10 to 20% across the board.
Across the board, wow.
And then on top of that, he's talked about even credit rates for specific countries, China, Mexico, Canada. We're talking 45%, 25%, 25% respectively.
Whoa, okay, so those are some big numbers. So wouldn't that just make everything more expensive for Americans? Like if we're putting tariffs on all these imports?
Potentially. I mean, wouldn't American companies just raise their prices too to kind of keep up?
Right.
That's the big question, right? That's where things get complicated.
Yeah.
But the goal of these tariffs is to make those imported goods more expensive.
Correct.
To encourage people to buy American-made products instead. And ultimately, the goal there is to reduce the trade deficit, which is when a country imports more than it exports. Think of it like your personal budget. If you're spending more than you're earning, you're running a deficit.
Okay, I see. So how would this affect me on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, so let's say you're thinking about buying a new car.
Okay.
A lot of car parts, even in American-made cars, they come from Mexico.
Right.
So if those tariffs are imposed, those parts become more expensive, which means the price of the car could go up, even if it's assembled here in the U.S.
Huh. And what about things that we just import directly from these countries?
Like avocados.
Okay, yeah, avocados.
A lot of avocados come from Mexico, so those tariffs, guacamole is going to get a lot more expensive.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could hit my wallet. But, I mean, this is all speculation right now, right? What are businesses actually doing to prepare for this?
It's not just speculation. Companies are taking this very seriously. For example, Hyundai, the Korean car manufacturer, they're reportedly shifting some production to their U.S. factories to try and avoid those potential import taxes.
Wow.
That's a big move.
Yeah.
And it shows how real the threat of a trade war is for these companies.
That's a great example. So even U.S. allies like South Korea could get caught in the crosshairs of these universal tariffs.
Yeah, it seems that way. Think tanks that are analyzing the situation, they're skeptical that Trump would, give preferential treatment to certain countries just because they're allies.
Right, yeah.
His focus seems to be on deal-making, using tariffs as leverage to get the best possible outcome, regardless of, diplomatic relationships.
So it sounds like no one is really safe. But are there any arguments against these tariffs?
Of course there are. A lot of economists are worried that these tariffs could actually backfire.
How so?
Well, they argue that higher import prices are inevitably going to lead to domestic companies raising their prices as well.
Oh, that's kind of like a chain reaction.
Yeah, and ultimately that hurts consumers more than anyone else.
So instead of making America great again, it could end up making everything more expensive for everyone.
Yeah. That's the fear. And, with Trump's history of being sensitive to inflation,
Right.
he might hesitate to actually implement all of these tariffs at once. He doesn't want to be seen as the reason that prices are going up across the board.
Right. It's a tough balancing act. On one hand, he wants to protect American industry and jobs. But on the other hand, rising prices for consumers could be a political disaster.
Exactly. It'll be interesting to see how he navigates those competing pressures.
Yeah. And speaking of balancing acts, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about another major area where Trump wants to make an impact: energy. Remember making America energy dominant?
Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
So what's the game plan there? What's he going to try to do?
Well, this analysis suggests that he'll likely focus on reversing restrictions on oil and gas drilling, promoting LNG exports, and potentially embracing smaller, modular nuclear reactors.
Okay, so it sounds like he wants to make the U.S. like a powerhouse in the global energy market.
Exactly.
But how could that affect, like, me personally? Will my energy bills go down?
It's possible increased domestic production of oil and gas could lead to lower prices for things like heating, electricity, and even gas.
Okay.
But, there's a trade-off to consider. More drilling and a greater reliance on fossil fuels could have a negative impact on the environment.
Right. Cheaper energy might come at a cost.
Yeah, there are always trade-offs.
It seems like with all of these policies, there are potential benefits, but also potential downsides. It's not always a clear-cut situation.
It's very nuanced.
It's very nuanced.
And it's important to remember that Trump's energy goals, they're all connected to his broader economic goals. It's about boosting American industry and influence on the world stage.
So it's not just about energy independence. It's about using energy as a tool to achieve other objectives.
Exactly. And that brings us to a potential conflict. His energy goals might actually clash with his stance on China.
That seems kind of counterintuitive. How can he reconcile those two things?
It's a tricky situation. While Trump wants to boost U.S. manufacturing, he's also wary of China's dominance in electric vehicle technology.
Right.
Especially their control over batteries and those rare earth minerals that are needed to make them. So if he pushes for more electric vehicles in the U.S., wouldn't that just increase our dependence on China?
Right. That makes sense. So he wants to be energy independent, but he also wants to limit China's influence. That's quite the dilemma.
It is, and it raises a key question. How is he going to balance those competing priorities?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we'll explore that question and what it could mean for you after a quick break.
Stay tuned.
So how could this clash actually, play out? How could it affect us?
Well, it all boils down to electric vehicles, you see. While Trump wants to see more things made in America, he's also really wary of how much the U.S. relies on China for EV technology,
Right.
particularly batteries and those rare earth minerals needed to make them.
So if he pushes for more electric vehicles in the U.S., wouldn't that just make us even more dependent on China?
Exactly. And that's a tough pill to swallow for someone who's so focused on, American dominance.
Yeah.
So this analysis suggests that one way he might try to address this is by eliminating or at least reducing those tax credits for electric vehicles.
But wouldn't that make EVs more expensive? And then people wouldn't buy them as much? That seems like it would kind of work against his whole goal of boosting American manufacturing.
It's true. Reducing those tax credits could definitely slow down how quickly people adopt EVs in the U.S.
Right.
But remember, Trump's primary focus here seems to be on limiting China's influence, even if it means, maybe slowing down the growth of a promising sector.
So if I'm thinking about buying an electric car, maybe this isn't the best time.
It really depends on your priorities, I guess. If affordability is a major concern, then yeah, you might want to wait and see how this all develops. Those tax credits can make a big difference in the overall cost.
And what about the bigger picture? If fewer people buy EVs because of the price, wouldn't that slow down the whole, transition to clean transportation?
Yeah, that's definitely a concern for people who are pushing for that rapid shift to electric vehicles. A reduction in demand could have ripple effects throughout the whole EV market,
Right.
potentially slowing down innovation and investment in the sector.
It's like every decision has these complex unintended consequences.
It really does, and it highlights just how important it is to think critically about these issues and, consider those long-term implications. We're not just talking about what hits your wallet today. We're talking about the potential direction of entire industries and the global economy as a whole.
All right, so we've talked about tariffs and energy policy and electric vehicles. These are all big, complicated issues. Is there a simple way to sum up what it all means for, the average person?
Well, if I had to boil it down to one key takeaway, I'd say be adaptable, stay informed about what's happening, and think critically about how these potential changes could affect you personally. No one has a crystal ball, but by understanding the forces at play, you can be better prepared to navigate whatever comes next.
That's great advice. So it's not about panicking or making rash decisions. It's about staying informed and being ready to adjust as needed.
Exactly. We live in a time of rapid change and uncertainty. The more you understand about the economic landscape, the better equipped you'll be to make informed decisions about your finances, your career, your future.
This has been incredibly helpful. We've covered a lot of ground, from the potential impact on individual consumers to the moves that companies are making to adapt. But there's one more piece of the puzzle that we need to explore: the potential global consequences of all of this.
Yeah, we've been focusing on the potential impact on you as an individual, but we can't forget that these policies could have far-reaching consequences on the global stage. We've talked about this idea of a trade war, but let's really unpack what that could look like and what it might mean for everyone, not just Americans.
Okay, so that sounds like a topic for our final segment. We'll be right back to explore those global implications. Okay, so let's talk about this trade war thing. What would that actually look like in the real world?
Well, it could get pretty messy. Imagine the U.S. puts tariffs on goods from China, right? And then in retaliation, China puts tariffs on American products. Things could escalate really quickly with both sides, trying to outmaneuver each other.
Right.
And that could lead to higher prices, economic instability, just a lot of uncertainty for businesses and consumers on both sides.
So instead of helping the U.S. economy, a trade war could actually hurt everyone.
Yeah, that's a big risk. A lot of economists think that trade wars are ultimately lose-lose situations. They disrupt those global supply chains, reduce economic growth, and just create this climate of uncertainty where it's hard for businesses to plan for the future.
Okay, but how would a global trade war like that affect me personally? I mean, I'm not a big corporation or anything.
Well, think about it this way. A global trade war would definitely impact the whole U.S. economy.
Right?
We could see job losses, reduced investment, slower economic growth, and that could affect your job security, the value of your investments, even the prices you pay for everyday things.
So even if I'm not directly involved in international trade, I could still feel the effects.
Exactly. It's all connected. And it's not just about the economic impact either. These kinds of actions could really strain relationships with key allies like South Korea.
Right.
They rely heavily on trade with both the U.S. and China.
So we're talking about potential geopolitical consequences as well. Could this shift alliances or even create new tensions globally?
It's definitely possible. These kinds of economic disputes can spill over into politics, and that can lead to, a whole realignment of global power.
This is a lot to think about. It seems like every decision could trigger this chain reaction with consequences we can't even predict.
It's true. The global economy and the whole geopolitical landscape are incredibly complex and interconnected. Think of it like a giant spider web. You tug on one strand, and the vibrations are felt throughout the whole thing.
Wow. Okay, so where do we go from here? What's the main takeaway for our listeners as they try to make sense of all this?
Well, in a world that's this complex and unpredictable, the most important thing is to just stay informed, engage in critical thinking, and be prepared for a dynamic and potentially volatile environment. We've gone over a lot of potential scenarios today, but the reality is things could unfold in ways we haven't even thought of.
So there's no easy answer, no one-size-fits-all solution.
Not really, but by understanding the forces at play, the potential risks and opportunities, you can make more informed decisions about your own life and navigate this uncertainty with a little more confidence.
That's really helpful. Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from the potential impact of tariffs to the possibility of a global trade war. It's clear that Trump's economic policies could have a big impact on individuals, businesses, and the whole world.
It's been great exploring these complex issues with you. Hopefully, our listeners feel empowered to keep learning about these topics and have thoughtful discussions about the forces shaping our world.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the potential economic impact of a new Trump presidency. Remember, in a world of constant change, knowledge is power. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. Until next time, this is The Deep Dive, signing off.